Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
okay on my side. I don't know if it's okay on everybody's side as well. Okay.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not full screen yet.
Yeah, I'll put a full screen in a second. I'm going to jump between a couple things just to give some context, but.
Okay. Yeah. So Brian, I think we can start, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So yeah. Hi, everyone. So today we are going to be having a talk from one of SIAM's members, who is Damyn Chipman, a fourth-year computing PhD student with emphasis in computational math, science, and engineering. And Damyn will be taking us through his summer 2022 internship experience. So I think during this summer, Damyn worked on a project that he'll be taking us through. So I think from here, I will just allow him to take over and then introduce us to his project and then what he did during the internship. Thank you very much. Damyn, you can take over.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this summer I was at Lawerence Livermore National Lab, and I worked on a code package, a physics, multi-physics package called Kull. And before I dive into what Kull is and, a new material interface reconstruction implementation into Kull, I need to give a little context because everyone at the lab knows what I say or knows what I'm talking about when I talk about ALE, or Arbitrary Lagrangian-Eulerian. And that's a lot of what I worked on was some ALE codes. So before I dive into that, I'll give a super brief context of what ALE is, right? And so ALE stands for Arbitrary Lagrangian-Eulerian. And from if you've taken any numerical methods classes on partial differential equations, you may or may not have talked about Lagrangian approaches and Eulerian approaches to working with a mesh and solving your PDEs on that type of mesh. This is a slide I gave a conference a long time ago, but it breaks down Eulerian and Lagrangian, right? Eulerian is like your Cartesian mesh idea, right? So you have some kind of grid or mesh, and it's fixed in space. You've got cells or elements or zones, depending on the discretization scheme you're working with. But that's an Eulerian scheme, right? You'll have some kind of element and you'll have stuff coming into or out of your element or your cell, depending on what you're looking at. And then a Lagrangian scheme takes your nodes or some particles and will move your mesh with the velocity field of your hydro of your hydro code. And so those are kind of generally speaking, two ways to do meshes, right? You have fixed Eulerian mesh, cells and elements, versus Lagrangian with particle-based or node-based, where those nodes can move and advect with your solution. So when I mention arbitrary Lagrangian-Eulerian, it's an approach that kind of meshes the two mesh ideas. And the idea is this: you might have here's a picture from Livermore's BLAST code, which also uses an ALE approach. But here's one of their pictures that they have, and the idea is to take your Lagrangian mesh and do a couple of time steps with it, right? Where you advect your mesh with the velocity field, right? And then there's this intermediate step where you will remesh and remap your mesh back onto a better looking Eulerian mesh. The reason you need to do that is because with some of these hydro codes and applications, your mesh will get tangled. You might have nodes cross into each other. You might have really warped elements, and so you have this need to remesh and remap your mesh back to something that looks, more Eulerian, more normal. Whatever normal looks like, for that kind of mesh. And so with that context, I'll dive into this. And so when I mention ALE, that's what I'm talking about, right? This idea to take your mesh and move it, and then remap your mesh back onto something that's more normal. Okay, so this summer I worked on a new material interface reconstruction implementation into Kull. I worked with Dr. Branson Stevens. He's a code physicist at Livermore. So this talk's about 15 minutes, so we'll have lots of time for questions, and I won't keep you the whole hour that we're allotted here. So this was part of an exit talk, so I had to do an about me, but yeah, there's me. Okay, so Kull is it's a radiation hydrodynamics code for modeling inertial confinement fusion and high energy density phenomena. So I can move some of these windows so I can see my notes. So Kull, as a multi-physics package, can model things like hydrodynamics, radiation transport. It's got a laser package. And it does all of this on an unstructured mesh. And like I said, it uses this arbitrary Lagrangian-Eulerian approach. It also works with multiple materials. So you can have any number of materials or species that you want. And that raises some, introduces some complexities that we'll talk about. So this simulation here is an application run of Kull. This is a laser-driven helium aerogel experiment. So one of the things that Kull can model is this inertial confinement fusion and high energy density physics. So Livermore is home to the world's most energetic laser. It's housed at what's called the National Ignition Facility. It's this massive building. I got a tour when we were there. I think it's 4 football fields big to generate a laser that goes into a big target chamber that will hit a target that's no bigger than a penny, right? And so that's what this is kind of trying to model. So you've got these lasers coming in, and it looks like they bounce off, but they're really just coming in from the bottom. This is a cylindrically symmetrical simulation. And these lasers will come and interact with this helium material, which is this top part, something like gold or copper or something like that. This is your helium. And then the lasers deposit their energy up here and begin to ablate this material. So it makes it super hot, and that material explodes outward, and it sends a pressure or a shock wave into the material. And then as the lasers develop or deposit their energy onto the helium, they emit X-rays that come and interact with this right-hand side, which is an aerogel material, and then that begins to ablate and send and explode basically. And so that's what this is modeling, right? You've got this this ICF experiment, and you get this complex interaction of materials and all your hydro variables and all your other multi-physics going on. So that's what Kull can do. And this simulation was run with the material interface reconstruction that I implemented this summer. So ALE remapping and material interface reconstruction is an integral part of Kull. So for that simulation in the previous slide, this was kind of the package list that it uses. It has a laser package, a hydro package, thermal and radiation package, and then an ALE remap package. And so the ALE hydro process consists of a Lagrangian step, a rezone step, and a remap step. The Lagrangian step is where your solution and mesh is advected with the velocity field. You have your rezone step where your mesh nodes are relaxed to create some kind of better mesh. There's lots of different criteria for what might be a better mesh, right? But that's what that takes place in the rezone step. And then you have the remap step where your solution that you have from the previous mesh has to be mapped onto the new mesh. And so the material interface reconstruction occurs in this remap step, this third step of the ALE hydro process. And the goal of the material interface reconstruction is to create a pure material region from zones that consist of multiple materials. So if you have a zone, element, cell, whatever you want to think about, if it has multiple materials in it, 20% of this thing, 80% of another, the rest of the other code packages need to be able to work on pure material regions. And so material interface reconstruction, or MIR, will break those those cells into pure material regions. So I implemented what is called Young's method. I'll talk about some of the other methods that are already in there into Kull in a second. But Young's method is a PLIC style method for unstructured interface reconstruction. So PLIC stands for piecewise linear interface calculation, and it works like this. So you're given some kind of mesh zone, can be any structure, so it can be any shape here, and you're given the volume fraction in this zone. In this case, I've got like 60% something, 40% of something else, and then I can either compute or I'm given a normal vector. In this case, the normal vector is given from the volume fraction field. So I calculate it from the gradient of the volume fraction. But you can think of the normal vector as the direction of material. So that's the direction that it points. And with the normal vector and with the centroid of the zone, I can create this normal line and that, or a plane in 3D. And that will be our reference for this zone. And so I begin with some kind of initial guess, and I create what's called a cut plane that's perpendicular to my normal line along the axis of my normal line, right? And so doing that, I can now I can compute how much material I have in this, in the region above the cut plane and the region below the cut plane. And so then I use this as part of a nonlinear solver. So then I'm going to be iterating using Newton-Raphson method to eventually get the location of my cut plane that will give me my desired volume fractions. And so when I do that, I can now split my zone into two pure material regions. In this case, I have a red region and a blue region that represent 60% and 40% of the material that exists in this zone. So after I split my zone into my pure material regions, the other parts of the code needed to work with triangles or pure material triangles. So you have to take this polygon and then split it into a bunch of triangles. And that's one of the other algorithms that I had to write was, taking general shaped polygons and creating triangles out of them. And then that's what I return. I return a collection of pure material triangles, and that's what the material interface reconstruction does. So this can be done for any number of materials using a nested dissection approach, where you do one material and all the others, and then you ignore that material you've already sectioned off, and then you do the next material and all the others, and you do that for as many materials as you need. And so this works for any general shaped closed polygon, which was super nice because sometimes the polygons you get in these simulations can be really wonky. And so Young's method, as implemented into Kull, outperforms the SLIC method and is comparable to the Elvira method. So the other two main MIR methods that were implemented into Kull already were the SLIC and Elvira methods. So SLIC is a simple line interface calculation, and Elvira was the efficient least squares volume of fluid interface reconstruction algorithm. That's a handful, so we just saw, or a mouthful. We just call it Elvira. So SLIC is kind of a lower order approach to this, where you can only work with horizontal or vertical lines. So same idea, but lower order. And then Elvira is it's a pretty robust algorithm, but it requires a structured grid stencil. So for most of the time, Elvira works perfectly fine. But because Kull is an unstructured grid code, sometimes Elvira doesn't work as well. And so that was the motivation for a native and unstructured code or method. So we tested this implementation with lots of different hydro test problems. We did a simple static mesh, 2 and 3 material shear, which is what's being shown on the right. We did a helium bubble shock and a triple point problem, and we'll look at what each of those looks like in just a second. But for each of these test problems, we would look at various metrics like material breakup, surface continuity, and then what is called flotsam and jetsam. So flotsam and jetsam is kind of it's jargon for basically small pieces of material that leave the bulk mass and are floating around your domain. Small meaning like 1 × 10⁻⁻10 right, in volume fraction. So something that's not really physical, but but that is there because of the method. So over here on the right is the 2 and 3 material shear problem. This is just the 3 material one. Young's method is the method up top. Elvira is the method on the bottom. And so you can compare and contrast how they look. So the goal of this one is you have an artificial velocity field where you advect this material and then you re-advect it backwards to try and see how well you can keep that material together. So this is the bubble shock problem. This is one of the test cases we looked at. It's a 2 material problem, so it was one of the first bigger applications we looked at. But you have a shock wave come in from the right and then impact a helium bubble, and then that creates all sorts of other reflected and transmitted waves. But the idea is to look at the material interface here. This is a numerical Schlieren image. So we're basically looking at gradients in the density. And what you get is this characteristic roll up of the bubble. This was a higher res one, so I didn't run it very long. But you've got Young's method up top and Elvira method on the bottom. And so they looked as expected. And so that's what we used to compare the two. Next, we look at what is called the triple point problem. The triple point problem is it's a 3-state 2 material simulation. So you have this middle material. You have this middle kind of rectangular block that at the start of your simulation, that's a lower density material. And then up top you have and to the right, you have a higher density material. And then in the region on the left, you have it's a high pressure region. So this high pressure region will drive the rest of the fluid, the material to the right, because of the high pressure zone. And then because of the varying densities, you get this roll up effect, right? So it's a classic hydrodynamic test case. It's not really physical, but a lot of hydro codes will run this problem to see what it looks like. And so looking at Young's method, which is the top on both simulations, and then Slick on the bottom left and Elvira on the bottom right, everything looked exactly as we expected. There are some subtle differences in these hydrodynamic instabilities here, right? If you look at the two, at the top and the bottom, there's some subtle differences there, but that's to be expected, as these are just different numerical methods to do the same thing. So this is useful, it looks good, right? But it's not very useful in determining how well Young's method does compared to the other ones. So if we visualize this in a little bit different way, and we look at the log of the volume fraction of this middle region, that's what we're looking at. So now we're on a log scale of this middle material fraction region. You can start to see what we call flotsam and jetsam. So flotsam and jetsam, if you look down at the Slick implementation, you'll see a lot of it. And this is what is flotsam and jetsam. It's little pieces of material, right? The white color tells us it's like, on the order of, 1 e to the negative 9, 1 e to the negative 6, right? So very, very small pieces of material that, leave the bulk mass and are now floating around the domain. And so that's what we're trying to minimize. We want to have as little of this as possible in our simulation, because it can really start to mess up other stuff. You don't want a piece of copper floating around your vacuum, right? Because it's going to mess up a lot of your thermodynamic variables. So the Slick implementation as a lower order method has lots of flotsam and jetsam, as you can see. And then the Elvira method does pretty well in this case, keeping the material together, right? There's a little bit that floats off, but that's there. And Elvira is pretty good. And then the Young's method that we implemented has this flotsam and jetsam that kind of shoots up into the right. And so that's just the nature of our implementation. And so this allows us to compare the flotsam and jetsam for these different cases. So one of the other things I did over the summer was a lot of visualization. I made a lot of pretty pictures. So Kull, when it outputs simulation data, it outputs what are called silo files, and that has all of the all of your simulation variables that you would need to visualize. But it does not give the pure material triangles that this material interface reconstruction algorithm would compute. So over here on the left is a visualization of one of our static test cases. So what the silo file will give us is just this mesh zone, these quadrilaterals here. And then we have to do post-processing to actually look at the separation of materials here. And the distribution of material here does not, or it will most likely not match what is actually being used during the material interface reconstruction. So one of the things that I did was add this capability to output the pure material triangles with a parallelized output format called VTK, where you can now look at just the pure material triangles to see the specifics of what each MIR method is doing. And you can see there's some subtle differences between what Visit is doing, the visualization software that we're using as a post-processing step to see the material interface versus what the actual simulation is using during the simulation runs. So what this lets us do is look at this dynamically and really compare, at least in the eyeball norm, how well these methods do dynamically. So again, this is the triple point problem, and we've zoomed in on the triple point, and now we're moving with that triple point during the simulation. And so we can compare and contrast these methods, and there's some pros and cons to both. So Young's method has this kind of scaling effect. If you can see on the interface of this blue and red at this top left right here, Young's method does not preserve continuity across zone boundaries. It's not designed to do that. Whereas Elvira, that's how it's built, is to preserve the continuity across this interface. And so you get much smoother interfaces with the Elvira method. On the contrast, the Elvira method does less better job at keeping material together versus the Young's method, which keeps this material together in a better sense. And that's what we concluded was that's because Young's method is a gradient-based method. You kind of get this buoyancy effect of material. So if a piece of material starts to break off from the bulk mass, then because it's a gradient-based method, it will tend to float back to the rest of the material. And you can kind of start to see that in Young's method as this starts to break off, right? And then it starts to float back together. So you get, more pieces of material that are closely knit together. So pros and cons to both. And the code user just has to be aware of the pros and cons of each material interface reconstruction implementation when running their code. So finally, by the end of the summer, I was working on 3D cases, and I got the 3D implementation of Young's method pretty much built. So this could run in 3D and it works just fine. The 2D case extrapolates perfectly to 3D, right? Instead of using a normal line, use a normal plane, right? It's kind of simple to implement. And so this is a snapshot of the triple point problem in a fully 3D simulation at low resolution. So by the time I was done over the summer, this was done, but it was really slow. So I didn't do any high resolution runs or a lot of comparisons. But that was that's profiling and optimization is the next task for Branson, who's continued to work on this. So in conclusion, over the course of the summer, I implemented Young's method into the Kull code. It's native to Kull's unstructured AL mesh. It's multi-material, and it's 2D and 3D was done by the time these slides were done. So as a part of that, I wrote, tested, and verified over 1,000 lines of code, and got to develop on a lab-wide multi-physics code, right? The code that is constantly being used in lots of different applications and needs to be bug-free, efficient, and fast, right? So that kind of production level code and getting that experience was really good. And I got to be there in person, which was a lot of fun. So that's what I did this summer. And it was a ton of fun. So let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for letting me talk.
All right. Thank you, Damyn, for your talk and taking us through your summer 2022 experience. I think at this point we'll invite questions. So if anybody has a question, feel free.
Hi, Damien. Yeah,
Hey, Brian.
thanks for the presentation. So mine
Yeah.
is kind of a general question. So could you share with the members how easy it was to get this internship?
How it works? Sorry, say that one more time.
So how it was easy for you to get this internship, or any kind of information you can give to the members here? I would like to do the same work you did.
Yeah, so every summer, Livermore hosts, I think it's 200 to 300 interns, maybe I think more actually, across the lab in different capacities. So I was part of what's called the Defense Science and Technology Internship. That's a program in the weapons complex of the lab that does. So there's like 60 to 70 of us that were part of this program, and you can just, you know, every summer they have a general posting for this on the lab's website. So I did this internship. I did the same internship last summer, working on something different. So it was kind of a continuation to work on that. But if anyone's interested, by all means, all of this info is on the lab's website. We just go to LLNL.gov. And find your way to careers and internships. These postings are pretty much always active. I don't know if they've done it, have it for next summer yet, but they will really soon. So yeah, if anyone wants to do that, it's super fun. It's challenging, fun, interesting problems that we get to work on.
Does this mean that U.S. military is now working on a, Star Wars kind of weapons with lasers and stuff?
Nope, they're not doing Star Wars.
If you knew, you wouldn't tell us, would you?
I don't know. I don't think they're doing Star Wars. Yeah, no, I mean,
no,
like the lasers. Yeah, but yeah, the lasers.
No, I mean,
right here is part of NIF, right? If you haven't heard about NIF, NIF is super cool. You should definitely, at least see what NIF is all about. It's fusion research to study nuclear fusion energy, right, as an energy source in the future. It's super cool, the kind of research that they get to do there. So, but yeah, it's lasers and stuff, kind of fun.
So to follow up on Brian's question, you mentioned it's a defense weapons something complex. So I imagine it's really hard, next to impossible, to get this internship in that particular area for foreign nationals, not?
So they do have postings for foreign nationals. I interacted with a few foreign nationals while I was there. I think you do need to be a U.S. citizen to do the defense science one. And even then, there might be some caveats that would allow a foreign national to work there. But the lab does have lots of postings for foreign nationals. And so if you're interested in national security research, there's openings for them.
Did you feel that your education at Boise State in numerical analysis prepared you well for this class? And, just so you know, I was your teacher. So just when you answer that question.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely did. So I didn't do a lot of numerically solving PDEs. There's a lot of geometry that I was not really expecting. But yeah, I mean, all of the consistency and stability of a method, that's all there. You got to make sure that all works and stuff. And luckily, the theory of Young's method is pretty well hashed out. It's a method from like the 1980s. But no, I mean, yeah, got to work a lot with people doing finite element codes. Kull uses a staggered it's a staggered grid hydrodynamics code. So one, in your 575, the numerical method class
65. Yeah. Yep.
We use a staggered grid, right? And that's exactly what this was. So
cool. And then did you really implement it all in only 1,000 lines of code? Was that some estimate you gave? It seems like it would take a few more lines than that.
So like applications and stuff, that there was a lot more to that, but in the Kull code, that in theory, once it's merged onto the main branch, will live in the Kull code. It's about 1,000. But that, I had a whole Python prototype, right, that we did before we actually did everything into Kull. Kull's a C++ based code, so yeah, lots more lines of code than 1,000. But yeah. Cool.
And did you visit? I mean, have you used it before?
So that's what I use now. I use visit a lot more than Parity now.
Okay.
But
nice. Well, it looks like it was a great opportunity, and you seems like quite a bit done in that amount of time. So
yeah, no, it was fun. It was a good project, good mentors. It was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. You're great.
I have a question. It's not about the work. I don't have an idea about this work you did, but the experience you gained from your internship, do you feel like this is something you would like to keep working on if you get a chance in the future, or you couldn't wait to finish it?
Yeah, so I definitely want to go back. And I think the experience at internships in general is very much worth it, because you get to see problems in a different light, different application, more than academic, which is you need both. So yeah, overall, I mean, I loved it. I hope to go back. Again, like I said, the challenges and the technical aspect of it is super interesting. I didn't work with any of the parallelization stuff that was kind of already, but a lot of the challenges in some of these next generational codes are this, working at scale and stuff, which is, a lot of what I know a lot of you all are working on, running things on GPUs and at scale on high performance computers and stuff. So lots of cool challenges that I hope to tackle. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, if there's not any other questions, thank you very much. It's fun to, see you all, kind of. I'll see you all in Boise again soon. But I'll turn the time back over to Titus or Brian. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Damon.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. Yeah, so I think that brings us to the end of today's SIAM presentation. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Damien, for a nice talk. Right. Okay. Goodbye.
Thanks all. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you. So